Well, you join me tonight at a new venue for me really, a place called Lakeview Fishery, not too far from Dinnington, near Sheffield. And I've come here tonight to do a spot of waggler fishing, because this time of year, waggler is a great tactic, and already I'm getting among some lovely little carp like this. And this looks like a fairly freshly stocked fish to me. It's a really pretty little mirror, as you can see. But the thing with waggler is, especially at this time of year, you can use it to catch fish of all species. It really is a great tactic in the cool weather. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk you through my setup, and then we can look at feeding and hopefully catch a few more fish like that one. So why is waggler fishing such a key tactic at this time of year? Well, there's two main reasons. First one is this. The number of days we have like today, where it was -3 this morning, absolutely freezing, everything was white over with frost, and here we are yet in the afternoon, the sun's shining, I'm sat here in a rugby top with my gilet, and I'm quite toasty. It's probably about 12 degrees. But what that gives you is quite a dangerous combination for fishing. It means you've got clear water and bright sunshine. And that'll often mean that the fish shy away from any bankside disturbance. Things like, I don't know, the silhouettes of poles over the redds can sometimes put the fish off at this time of year, which is where the waggler really comes into its own, because you can actually present your bait away from the bank. You know, you can fish 20, 30, 40 yards with a waggler if you want to, right out in the lake where the fish feel safe, in the clear water. And also you can really search the layers. Now, today, we've only got about 2.5, 3 foot of water where I'm fishing there, so it's not as relevant today really. But on a venue that might be 6, 7, 8 foot deep, you might find that the fish are maybe sat at 3 foot deep, and if you fish hard on the bottom with a feeder, you wouldn't get a bite. So by fishing a waggler, you can really search those layers of water and find the fish, find where the fish are sitting, and drop your bait past the nose. But it's all to do with how you set the float up and how you fish it to give you the presentation you want. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. So I'll start with the rod. Today I've got a Cadence CR10 11 foot match #1 rod. And the #1 is important because in this range that means it's a light waggler rod. And I always think you're as well erring on the lighter side when it comes to choice for general fishing, because that way if I hook a small roach, I'm going to land it. If I hook a big carp, if I take my time, I know I'm going to get it in. The reel, not too much to say about this really. It's a 3000 size reel, so it's a smallish reel, which I think is quite important because it allows you to get your hands and your fingers around the spool as you're fishing. Obviously you're very regularly touching the spool when you're waggler fishing, feathering the float down on the cast, or maybe controlling the drag when you hook a fish. So it's nice to have something that's manageable in that sense. Reel line, it's the 018 in the new Preston float fish line. Now, reel line choice is something I would vary depending on my target species and conditions. Now 018 for general commercial fishing I think is nice. It's robust enough to land any carp or bigger fish we might hook, but also it's still got the finesse to mean we're able to cast the float quite nicely, sink the line nicely, and basically get good presentation. Coming down to the waggler itself, right, I mentioned earlier I'd got a killer tip that was shown to me by a couple of members of the England team when it comes to waggler fishing, and I'm going to run through that in a second. But first, the way I connect the waggler to the line. Drennan do these lovely waggler attachments. They come on a little piece of wire, you can thread them straight on the line, and they've basically got 2 line stops with a rounded swivel in between. The rounded swivel is important because it means the waggler actually sits on the bottom of that, so when you cast, it flies nice and straight in the air. The waggler is just a 3 gram Drennan loaded crystal, and the key edge that I talked about, and this is brilliant, is what I've actually done here at the bottom of the waggler. Now, all too often if you watch a lot of anglers fish waggler, they've got a lot of locking shot around the float, and while that works well because obviously it takes the shot to capacity, the float to capacity, and allows you to dot it down, what it also does is gives you a lot of capacity for tangles, because obviously you've got a lot of mess around your waggler, but also for breakages, because obviously you're nipping quite a big shot onto quite light, delicate line. A much better way of doing it, and this was shown to me by Alan Scawthorne and Matt Godfrey, is to wrap solder around the base of your float. So it's a loaded float anyway, so you wouldn't need an awful lot of shot to take it down to its weight. But instead of putting locking shot either side of the Waggler attachment, what we've done here is just wrap solder, simple electrician solder, around the base of the float. And you can put as much or as little on as you want, wrap it round, give it a good firm squeeze in place, it'll stay put all day. Really, really good tip that. Down the line, just 2 number 8 stots. Again, I'd vary that. If I was fishing in deeper water and I wanted to read the fall of a bait through the water, I might spread more shot out along the line. Likewise, if I was trying to present a bait hard on the bottom, I might well bulk the shot down the line. But today, because we're trying to search the water, because it's only quite shallow anyway, we've got 2 number 8 stots spread out. So that's going to give my bait some fall through the water, a nice steady fall, and give me good presentation as well. At the bottom of that, we've got a little tiny Drennan swivel and a 12-inch hook length of 09 Preston Powerline. Hook choice is a size 18 F1 pellet. Now, 09 might sound quite light, and I suppose it is, but I mentioned these bright days, these cold mornings. The fishing this time of year can be tricky, so by starting off with a nice light hook length, I've got balanced tackle, I'm going to land what a hook, I can then step up if the carp start feeding. One of the most important things to get right when it comes to waggler fishing is the cast itself. And there's a couple of key things really that I was shown quite early in my angling life which have really helped me with this. The first one is the size of float you use. Always fish a slightly heavier float than you need to get to where you're actually feeding. So today I'm feeding about, I don't know, 20 metres probably. If I were to fish a float that would cast 20 metres, which the temptation is, 2 things would happen. Firstly, you'd find that the float would land among your feed area and you'd have a bow of line, or the potential for a bow of line to form between your rod tip and your float. And because obviously these venues are affected by wind and tow, it wouldn't be long at all before your float was pulled away from your feed area. I'm fishing a 3 gram float today, which lets me cast about 25 metres really easily. So I can cast out there dead accurately and reel it back in to the feed area. And so I'll just talk you through the process. Obviously the first thing's a 3 gram float, coming back up, leaving about, I don't know, 2 to 3 feet of line between the rod tip and the waggler, and it's a nice gentle cast. And we're just slowing the float down before it hits the water by dabbing our finger on the spool and then reeling back 5 turns and just giving it a little flick. So what we've done, we've cast past where we're feeding, wound back into where we're feeding, and then with a little flick of the rod tip, sunk the line between the rod tip and the float. So we know that not only are we fishing among where we've fed, and that bait's now falling through that feed area, we've got a lovely straight direct line between the reel and the float, with obviously the rod in between. And there's no potential, or not much potential, for a bow to form because we've casted past where we're fishing, wound back into it, and sunk the line between the rod tip and the float. Just a little bit then about loose feeding. I mentioned before, these cold mornings, these bright days, often less is more this time of year. So I'm not feeding too much at all until I know what's happening in the peg and how the fish are responding. And I'd urge you to do the same. Start off little and often, and if you're getting a few bites, you can then build up competition and really get the fish competing. So all I'm doing, I'm casting in and I'm feeding 3 or 4 pieces of 2-in-1 around the float. So I've just mixed the red and yellows together today. So there's about 4 pieces in the catapult. And again, like with the casting, we're not overstretching ourselves. It's just a nice gentle flick, gets us bait around the float. One thing that it is worth playing with, again, when we start to see a few indications and get some fish feeding, is sometimes you'll catch better feeding before you cast and casting into your bait and reeling back and sinking your line, so your bait's falling amongst your loose feed. And other times it's nice to get your float set, to cast, reel back in, and then feed around your float, which is how I've started off today, just to see how things progress. But obviously we've had that nice carp early, so I'm optimistic we're going to have quite a good day. That's another little F1. That one was straight on it, just as the bait actually fell through the water, which it's amazing how often this happens when it's cold like this, cold and clear. Quite literally instant action, as if the fish see that bright hook bait falling through the water and go down and grab it. But lovely little F1s. One key thing to experiment with at this time of year is your hook baits. Now, the fish, as I said, in this cold, clear water can be very, very fickle. But one thing I found works consistently well up and down the country on commercials is bright hook baits. Whether it's a fluoro maggot, a piece of corn skin, a piece of bread, or one of the Fuka neons, I've found that switching to a bright bait will often bring a bite from fish when all else fails. So don't be afraid at all. If you're not catching on the bait you're feeding, as you know, I always like to start on the bait I'm feeding. So for me, the go-to bait today would be a red or yellow piece of 2-in-1. But I haven't had a bite in a couple of casts, so I'm going to change to a nice bright piece of neons. Start with a pink one, see how we get on. Now, in conventional terms, or BF as I like to call it, before Fuka, I used to find that a fluoro maggot or a corn skin would be a deadly bait at this time of year. But now the neons are available, they make a really easy way to put something really bright and distinct on the hook and just see if you get a bite. And don't think either that you've got to fish a conventional pellet shaped piece of bait. I've just broke off a little piece and tried a really small smither of bait on that 18 hook. Other days, and David Preston certainly proved this on our filming days, you can catch well by squashing a bait and making it flutter through the water. As long as your casting's right, and I've sort of talked through how to do that today with that heavier float and casting past your feed area, as long as your casting's right, you can get away with fishing odd-sized, odd-shaped pieces of bait on the Waggler. Just a nice gentle lob and you'll find you can cast the Fuka wherever you want it without ripping the hook out. Well, that's been a lovely afternoon's fishing on the Waggler. It's not been amazing sport this afternoon, as you might expect really with the weather. As I said, -3 last night, and looking at that sky, I think it could be very similar tonight. I've had to actually put my jacket on, as you can see, because it's going a bit nippy now. But quite a lot of these, lovely little F1s and carp, probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them, as well as a couple of better fish as well, and some smaller silvers. The Waggler's a great method because it really lets you search the water and find where the fish are. For example, tonight I've caught a couple of my fish by casting right up to the island later. You know, as if the fish maybe have gone up there to hug the cover, or maybe it is a little bit warmer in that shallower water. So all I'd say is this springtime, if you're going to go out for a quick session, and maybe the weather has been a little bit cold at night and bright in the day, don't neglect the Waggler. It really is a great way to spend a few hours of your day.